Hello there, and welcome to the latest edition of the DF Direct Q&A show. Joining me to discuss a range of topics, but seemingly primarily a lot of PSSR, is first of all John Linneman. Hello.
Yes, Rich. It's time for some PSSR, my favorite pisser time.
Yep.
I actually love it, so
it's
good
stuff,
to talk about.
For sure. Okay, and Oliver McKenzie.
Yes, Rich. Well, I've been spending a lot of time on PSSR over the past 3 weeks, 4 weeks now, quite a while. So I'm happy to answer any and all PSSR 2 questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a fair few to get through. Some can be easily answered. Some will require a bit more explanation. We're going to kick off with this one from Jasper. Hi, guys. Do you have any closure? I like that closure. We need emotional closure on this. On which games have dedicated PSSR 2 patches and which don't? Messaging from Sony wasn't particularly clear on that. In addition, how does the system toggle to improve PSSR image quality actually work on a technical level? Keep up all your great work! Exclamation point. Yeah, I mean, we have to hold our hands up here because we talked about patches, right? And that was exactly what Sony told us when we were in the sort of production period of producing those videos, where we actually had access, limited access to those games. It was like, okay, so is this from the toggle? Is it from a patch? And we're told it's a patch, but it was actually a new firmware which had the toggle. So pretty much everything you've seen, and everything you've seen on any retail game so far, I think it's fair to say that it's just the system level toggle active. If you look at the interview we just posted on digitalfoundry.net with Mark Cerny, he goes into a bit more depth about that. I think we also discussed that in the last main direct. But Oliver, the system toggle is just like a kind of library change at the system level, right? That's kind of about it.
Yeah, I imagine they're just basically telling the game to use the newer PSSR library for those games without needing a patch. That's my expectation, at least. But on that toggle question, I think there's an important bit of nuance to inject into that whole conversation, which is that, yes, they are getting the new PSSR library without a patch, without a title update. But for the games that are whitelisted, there are 11 of them, and I have a list here. I think it's Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill F, Dragon Age: The Veilguard, Alan Wake 2, Control, Hellblade 2, FF7 Rebirth, Neo 3, Rise of the Ronin, Monster Hunter Wilds and Dragon's Dogma 2. All those games, whether you have the toggle turned on or off, will use the new PSSR. That's my understanding. That's my testing. So they'll basically all get the new PSSR, but it doesn't mean that those developers have gone in and tweaked anything, right? It just means basically QA has said, hey, we think this works well. Let's just do it for everyone, you know? There is one game that I know of that I think does have a discrete PSSR 2 implementing patch, and that's Crimson Desert, which I think maybe John can talk about, but I believe that game has a discrete PSSR 2 patch. I'm not aware of any other games at the moment that have a discrete PSSR 2 patch.
John, what do you think?
Yes, I think that's probably it's actually hard to gauge, right? Because we had access to the original version with PSSR 1, and then by the time we were able to activate review code, those patches for launch were live, right?
Right.
But I wasn't able to patch the older build, but I actually need to check if the toggle does anything, but presumably it's something built into the game. And I think the point here is, like, there's older games that developers won't go back and touch that the toggle allows the newer PSSR, but presumably if you're implementing it directly and patching your games, there's things you can do to possibly tweak it a little bit to get slightly better results. Whereas with the toggle, there's always, and we see this in the PC space, right? Where if you inject newer DLSS or FSR, it's usually good, but there's sometimes cases where it can cause some weirdness or something might look a little bit worse. And implementing it directly allows the developer to tweak it directly to ensure that it looks its best. So I think that's really the main difference. And I would assume going forward, it's just going to be any game using PSSR will use the newer version, I'd imagine.
Right.
So
I saw a thing online. I haven't had a chance to verify it myself, but they were comparing Pragmata, the demo, with the
hair.
Yeah, with the hair. That kind of suggests that the system level toggle does kind of just work on everything, which I didn't think was the case, but apparently is. I don't know.
Oh,
well,
it
it
does
is a
work
demo,
on everything,
but it should work. Yeah.
But it does indicate that the toggle does actually affect all games, not just the
yeah. No, 100%. Like I think Jedi Survivor wasn't on the list, right?
Jedi Survivor is affected by the toggle, but it's not on the
Yeah.
whitelisted list.
Right,
Yeah.
Correct.
got it. Right.
That was one of the first ones I tested, and I noticed that was hugely improved
Mhm.
over the original. And
Okay.
yeah, that's not on the whitelist. And there's a few others like that as well.
Yeah. Most of the games I've tested have not been the whitelisted ones, so I'll say that
Right.
much. But they have improvements.
It's really good now on GT7, whereas I felt PSSR was kind of not great before. Like it was a big step down from the native 4K mode. And the reason you wouldn't want to use it is that it allowed for in-game ray tracing, right? Which is really cool. You get all the ray trace reflections. And now with PSSR 2, it finally looks the part where you feel like you're not losing that much image quality compared to native 4K that they had before. Like it's a lot better.
Okay. There were some also some interesting comments in the Mark Cerny interview about whether they'll continue to update PSSR with new versions of PSSR on that toggle, and it seems that right now the thinking is not to. I kind of think they probably should, but I guess it would have involved probably another strenuous QA effort. I'm not sure. But obviously new games going forward would likely use the updated libraries. Let's move on. We've got sort of a PSSR or Project Amethyst adjacent question here from Etsu. Hello, team. Is it possible for the PS5 Pro to implement AMD's AI-based ray reconstruction in Crimson Desert? After all, it uses RDNA4 ray tracing acceleration technology. In terms of raw performance calculations, it should be enough to run at 1080p upscale to 4K at 30 FPS, and with some optimization, it could likely achieve stable performance. So, John, this is an interesting one because obviously Mark Cerny's basically saying, hey, well, ML frame generation that's in Redstone, we co-developed that with AMD,
Right.
which kind of suggests that the whole Redstone endeavor was a collaboration as well, and yet we're not seeing any sort of announcements yet beyond, specific announcements on ML, beyond ML frame generation, rather, beyond the fact that it is going to appear on PlayStation platforms. Ray reconstruction, or ray regeneration, rather, is obviously a good thing. What do you think about this? I mean, in theory, it should be possible, right?
Yeah, that's the thing is, given what we've seen so far with PSSR, even though they are very connected at the base, they are still distinct, right? And there are differences there. I would assume that if we're going to see this sort of like ray reconstruction or ray regeneration,
Yeah.
right, as they call it, sorry, it would have to be something that Sony would announce specifically for the console. And Cerny himself noted that there are no new announcements in the works for 2026 after the release of the most recent PSSR. So if that's something that's going to happen, it's not anytime soon, unfortunately. It does seem feasible that it would work on PS5 Pro, although the performance hit is certainly not negligible from what I understand. So I guess my thought is, could this be something they're just holding off on until the next generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
as it is, next generation is going to be tough enough, right? So they're going to kind of want to keep things interesting to make a new console seem
Yeah.
more worthwhile. But I don't know I have no idea what their plans are. But
I think a lot of this depends on whether ray regeneration depends on FP8 math or int8 math, because PS5 Pro doesn't meaningfully accelerate FP8 math, and RDNA4 technologies, FSR4, is based on FP8 math that was ported to int8 for the new PSSR. That's kind of a key question. The fact that the PS5 Pro uses RDNA4 like ray tracing acceleration doesn't really play into this question at all, because we're talking about the machine learning side of things, right? Which is quite different. So, if it can be ported over, presumably there's some work there again involved in changing data formats. That would be kind of they're kind of in a weird position, because ray regeneration is not like a fully polished ray reconstruction like technology. It's also not perfectly suited for the kinds of ray tracing workloads that work well on PS5 Pro. Maybe it's a next generation thing, I don't know, but I expect that we'll see something along those lines for PlayStation 6.
yeah,
Yeah, I think, Mark Cerny's basically expressed that future hardware is probably going to dovetail very, very closely with what AMD is doing in the desktop space, whereas which will make ports, quote unquote ports, or other reinterpretations of that existing technology to console a lot easier. I mean, the crazy thing is, of course, that we first learned that a technology akin to FSR4 was going to appear on PS5 Pro literally just a year and 1 week prior to it actually arriving on the PS5 Pro. So it actually took a long time for them to get the technology into a shape where they were happy to ship it, and in an optimal enough shape to ship it as well. I think that was the curious thing, of course, is that Int 8 version of FSR4 on PC does come with quite a hit to performance, whereas the PS5 Pro version is actually very, very fast, slightly faster than the original PSSR, in fact. Sounds to me like it wasn't an easy undertaking, but they did it. They thought they could do it. They did it. They delivered it. Going forward, though, the question is the amount of engineering effort that they put into further PS5 Pro versions of FSR Redstone technologies, or whether they just kind of hold fire and wait for PlayStation 6. I guess that all really depends on timing for PlayStation 6. Let's move on. HeyDF Crew says anxiously, chrono triggered, what are the chances we'll see another upgrade to PSSR this generation? I think PSSR Triple will debut together with PSR 6 or Sextuple, but I might be wrong. Cheers! ! Yeah, I mean, we have actually now got confirmation that machine learning based frame generation should be seen coming to PlayStation platforms, but what PlayStation platforms? All we know is that there's going to be no further releases of PSSR this year, which kind of like brings us into 2027, which is the year that many believe we'll be seeing next generation consoles. And then there's the whole concept of PlayStation platforms. That suggests more than one, right? Oliver, what do you think?
I think we'll continue to see incremental PSSR upgrades. Like PSSR 1 had, I think, at least 2 or 3 major revisions. I mean, major quote-unquote revisions. If there is a PSSR 3, I would imagine it will be more math-heavy and will probably run on a PS6 much better than a PS5 Pro, even if it doesn't break compatibility entirely. So I suspect that PSSR 3, PSSR triple for PS6, I think that's basically a lock. I don't think it's for PS5 Pro, even if it could run on it, because, PSSR and PS5 Pro are married like this. 2 milliseconds of frame time for a 4K upscale. I think that's a really ideal place to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've also got this question from Paul Calamata that's very, very closely related to that. What do you view as the long-term future of PSSR heading into the next generation? If AMD's FSR tech from 4.0 onwards is a proper ML upscaler, would it not be redundant and pointless for Sony to keep developing its own parallel version of the tech when both can be employed on the same hardware? Or is there some reason why this separate model would continue to exist past the PS5 Pro? I don't think there is a reason for it to exist beyond the PS5 Pro. There could be a case to be made for a streamlined version that's specific just for PlayStation 6, because obviously AMD has to roll out FSR for a whole stack of GPUs. So, there could be, kind of like parallel development in that sense, a tuned version of whatever happens next. Specific for PlayStation platforms. That kind of makes sense to me because, obviously Sony does a lot of bespoke tooling for its platforms, own GPU compiler, own development environment, stuff like that. So it kind of makes sense. The extent to which they'll continue to develop on PlayStation 5 Pro, though, I'm not sure. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that specifically, but I think the future of PSSR is kind of, as you noted, Sony likes their own software and development environments, right? So keeping it slightly distinct, even if they're built together with AMD as in a partnership, makes sense to me, given their history, right? They already are doing that essentially with the hardware, so why not the software? So
Right.
I think we'll continue to see it there. As far as PS5 Pro, I think they've kind of probably put the flag in the sand as far as like, here's what we have planned out for what we want to do on the Pro. And then things beyond that will be targeting next generation hardware.
Yeah. I think we're all agreed on that. Interesting to see what happens next, though, but no major announcements coming this year for sure.
Right.
Yeah, and I suspect 2027 there'll be plenty of announcements, but probably not to do with the PlayStation 5 Pro. I guess you kind of just need to see on that front. Let's move on. We got this question here from Captain Blad. Yes, DF professionals, exclamation point. Do you think it's acceptable for a game to ship in the year of our Lord 2026 without support for Intel Arc? With Crimson Desert seemingly doing everything else right, their cold shoulder to fellow duopoly haters doesn't seem to make sense with their overall vision. Intel just revealed they actually reached out to the devs, but were snubbed. Games which were released even then before the Arc cards came out can run on Intel Arc cards. How does it even make sense for this game coming years after Arc cards have entered the wild not to support them? Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense at all. The whole concept from my perspective of a graphics card is that unless we're dealing with like proprietary elements like DLSS, FSR, Redstone, for example, it goes through DirectX 12 and should work on everything. So I think there are some bizarre questions as to, or probably more bizarre answers as to why that isn't happening with Crimson Dawn. John, it's not really acceptable, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. I would say it's actually confounding. I haven't seen this in a long time. This sort of takes me back to the 90s
Yes.
and the 3DFX Voodoo days where didn't have the right graphics card. Sorry, can't play it. Like, this is so weird to actually just block it out, right? You would think it would at least run, possibly with issues, but no, they're just like straight up, you can't run this. That's actually what happened on the Steam Deck initially, by the way. That exact same error message pops up, but you could buy it by using experimental Proton, and then it didn't work after that. Though I think it might be working now.
Right.
I need to double check, which does give us some hope that maybe Intel Arc will be taken care of as well. But I just think you should just be supporting all of these cards at this point. I understand Intel has a small market share at this point, right? But still, leaving customers out in the cold like that, especially when they go to purchase the game on day one, only to be met with this error and then be told like, you just have to refund it. That really sucks. I would say. I guess I can't. I'm trying to understand why they might have done this, especially given that we know that Intel reached out to them and attempted to, talk to that conversation. Intel, just like the others, has a whole team dedicated to working with developers to ensure that their games work on their hardware, right? Or did somebody in Pearl Abyss just like associate Intel exclusively with integrated graphics or something? Like I'm trying to think of like what would have led to this. Like it almost seems like more plausible that it would be just kind of weird mix up where they're just like, oh yeah, Intel integrated graphics, that's not going to run our game. But I don't know. Like I genuinely can't fathom why this has occurred.
Yeah, it's totally baffling because obviously, Pearl Abyss put out a whole bunch of technical specifications, saying, hey, we do support iGPUs, but it's AMD ones. And,
right.
It's just not particularly great. It kind of erodes the foundation of PC gaming in a way because there has been this, just the fact that games do run, just sort of cutting off support for an entire vendor's line.
And this is after they did an entire native Mac version.
Yes, that's the other one, yeah.
For Apple Silicon, which is awesome. But like with that kind of attitude, you would have expected support for Intel as well on PCs. Like it's very arbitrary.
Absolutely baffling. I don't suppose you have any potential explanations, Oliver?
No, well, the obvious explanation is that the game is just coming in hot. They had to make choices about what to prioritize, and Intel Arc was towards the bottom of that list, I presume. But Intel Arc GPUs are everywhere, maybe not so much in desktop, like they don't have a large desktop share, but they do have a large iGPU share. And True. Some of those iGPUs are capable enough to run Crimson Desert pretty well, I'd have to say, especially the new Intel Arc Panther Lake 12XC variants out there. Those are more than capable of running this game pretty well, and soon enough we'll have gaming handhelds that run that chip, and people will expect to run one of the biggest games of 2026, and they won't be able to. I think that's a huge problem. But I think Pearl Abyss has said they are working on compatibility. So hopefully the situation will be addressed in time. But for now, not a very good look, I have to say.
What an own goal, though, right? Like, to say, we're working on it now, like, okay, why not before?
Crazy stuff. Hopefully it will be addressed. And yeah, it is bizarre because quite rightly there is a lot of market share in the integrated graphics space, which is only growing more and more important. Right? I guess it was just deprioritized, but to not actually make any kind of announcement about that pre-launch, and then just to say go and get a refund, mind-bending. Mind-bending
so
stuff. Let's move on. Question from Horizon of a New Day. He's not happy. Will you ever get around to covering the Xbox again? We get the Series S reliably. When you want to compare Switch 2 graphics to something and say, wow, Switch 2 has new tech and looks so much better than the S. That's 6 years old. If the whatever it is, Switch 2 didn't look better, well, Nintendo should be rightly ashamed of themselves. I get it, low power versus low power and all that. I assumed we get Crimson Desert compare. Nah, we get we get PS5. Nah, we get PS5 deep dive, PS5 Pro deep dive, PC deep dive, and radio silence on a full comparison. But look, more PSSR 2 coverage, and we'll go back and look at every single game ever made on PS5 Pro that had PSSR used. Why? We get it. It looks better and it's a cool edition. Then again, the Xbox feels dead. Microsoft has taken a pounding on on Windows 11 and AI. Everyone is leaving MS for Linux. Not really when you look at Steam numbers, but the Linux number is moving up there. Yeah, I kind of get the frustration, right?
Yep.
The specific reasons for Crimson Desert are fairly well known, though. We received a PlayStation 5 Professional with a pre-final version of the game. So, you know, obviously we would have loved to have looked at the base consoles, which everybody was really sort of curious about, but we couldn't. And nobody got console review code ahead of the game actually arriving on the shelves. So we're working through that as much as we can. But on the Xbox side, you know, I think we've spoken on Direct before about how, you know, sometimes we just don't get Xbox code and we chase it and we can't get it and we have to wait until launch for the game. You know, Metal Gear, I believe, was one of those games. Actually, we did actually get that, I think, in the end from the PR company, but not in an early enough manner. Yeah. Yeah, it's not great. I mean, I sympathise, right, John? But ultimately, we can't source games that, you know, we don't have unless the PRs cough them up, I suppose.
Yeah, there's multiple sort of angles to this. First of all, as you noted, what we've seen, we've been doing, DF's been around since the PS360 days, right? And we've always seen the trend that whichever platform is the market leader in terms of install base popularity and sort of like the basis for game development in many cases, that tends to be the code that's sent out first. When we started, it was mostly Xbox 360, right? Had to jump through some hoops to get PlayStation 3 sometimes because 360 was like the main one. And then that changed with PS4 and Xbox One, where PS4 became sort of the leader. But during this period, it was surprisingly even. But this generation, it does feel like Xbox code is just harder to come by. And I can't tell if it's just developers or publishers or whatever choosing to not send it, or if I almost wonder if there's some kind of like system change happened with the way that the codes are given out for Xbox. Because even when we get first party Xbox, there's some differences in terms of how you actually access them that I thought were interesting that kind of started this generation sometimes. So I don't know if something's changing on that back end as well. But either way, you know, that is a shame. But also, when doing videos, there's different types of videos that we do, right? And not every video is just a console comparison. I don't really do many console comparison videos these days, myself, for instance. And so when I want to just cover a game's tech as a standalone thing, you know, you usually I like to pick the best console version just as sort of like a starting point. That's just like a weird personal preference, I guess. Like I often would use Xbox One X when I had the choice last generation, because that was the best of the bunch. And then this time, you know, now that the PS5 Pro's out, it usually makes sense to go for that. And then on the comparison side, when there's an actual normal console comparison, then of course Xbox is there. As far as Switch 2 versus anything else, I mean, Oliver kind of makes the choice. He's done sometimes PS4 versus Switch 2, Series S versus Switch 2. I do think makes sense because they are comparable. it can be fun to throw in the upper end systems, but all of it just comes down to time, right? Like and focus, time and focus. What kind of video do you want to make, and how much time do you have to make that? And like doing the type of video you want to do, but also getting all the console comparisons in is a lot of time, and it just doesn't always work out that way. So, and unfortunately, I feel like Xbox comparison videos that just most of the audience doesn't care that much anymore. So when you're deciding between making one type of video or another, that's going to be a lower priority, just because, I mean, they're not as popular, and from at least for me, they're not that fun to make. So I don't know, but it varies per person, per game. Like GTA 6, for instance, yeah, of course, Xbox versus PS5 is going to be a big deal, right? 'Cause it's a big game. People want to know. But not every game has that kind of need to know thing going on.
Oliver, what do you think?
Well, I think focus is a key element here, because like sometimes you don't just want to cram every single thing into one video. Sometimes you don't have time. Like I had pre-release access to Battlefield 6. That was a massive game. I made a call probably 2 or 3 days before he shipped that video not to do console comparisons in it, because I'm like, Rich, there's too much detail here. Like there's too much stuff. I can do it like a really half-butted job on the comparisons, or I can do a proper video and just focus on PS5. So that's what we ended up doing, and we ended up shipping a console comparison piece, I think 4 or 5 days later, which had all the relevant console comparisons beyond PS5. But obviously, by covering the PS5, I'm covering probably, 60% of our console audience, 70% of our console audience. I mean, just look at the numbers. It's a large fraction. But sometimes our hand is forced, like John and Rich mentioned, with Final Fantasy VII Remake. And in January, I might have included some Xbox coverage to that. We didn't get code before launch.
Right.
Also with Silent Hill F, I didn't get code before launch. But in both of those cases, I showed up on DF Direct a few days later to say, hey, here's the Xbox version, and here's how it's different, and here's how it's interesting, or whatever. So I do at least try, and I think generally, at least speaking personally, I do generally get out that information with the Xbox version. It just might come in a different format. And fundamentally, like, I don't think that people are all that interested, whether it's Xbox or PlayStation that we're covering predominantly, in the console comparison divide when it comes to current generation consoles. I think there's less emphasis on it. And I also think the technical comparisons are not that interesting at a time when, PS5, Series X, almost always very, very similar. Series S, sometimes it's a hatchet job, sometimes it's not. That's kind of interesting to see sometimes. The big exception to that, for me, at least at the moment, would be like PlayStation 5 Pro stuff, where oftentimes you're seeing very different image quality, very different kinds of ray tracing enabled on that console. And also, obviously, Switch 2, which has different upscaling. It's much lower power. It has all kinds of interesting efficiencies and interesting elements to it. It has 2 modes by default. It has lots of different things going on there that do make it a more interesting console as well. But just the standard kind of like PS5 versus Xbox Series X, Series S thing, I think is a little bit less exciting at this point.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to add to that. What I will say, though, is because of the nature of the Crimson Desert release, where, we didn't have any console code until Friday last week, it's like, where do we focus? And I guess we've got to focus on, to begin with, on where we're going with, where's the majority of our audience, and there are more PlayStation users than Xbox, so we have to prioritize PlayStation over Xbox. Otherwise, the whole content would just be too late to produce at that point, to have much relevance to people. It's really difficult. That's why we want code early. We got code early for Resident Evil Requiem. Everything's even Stevens, and that's great. But when we don't, that's a bit of a problem. We're sort of faced with massive tasks and limited resources. Not ideal. But let's move on. A question here from 1040 STF. John, if OLED technology eventually becomes Pulsar compatible, would that make you drop CRTs entirely, or do you think the phosphor look and the natural pixel blending still give CRTs enough of an edge to keep using them?
I would not drop CRTs entirely. Actually, there's multiple things to unpack in here. First of all, Pulsar is not going to ever be compatible with OLED due to how it works. It would have to be a different type of technology, right? Like, it just fundamentally, they are not compatible. So that wouldn't be there. But if we can get Pulsar like motion clarity on OLED, That would be amazing. The thing is, though, my main use of CRTs today is for older style consoles. And the point is like you just plug that in, you get it all into a nice setup like that one, and it just works. You hit power, turn on the console, instant picture, it looks beautiful, everything I want. If I'm relying on a flat panel to play those older consoles, then you can't plug them in natively, of course, so you need a scaler. I love stuff like the Tink 4K and all that, but it's an extra layer in the chain. It can be a little fiddly. You got to power that on. You got to get the right inputs, the right profiles set up. And yes, you can improve it to make it smoother, but it's never as direct as you get when you go into a CRT. There's just that extra layer there. And I find that slightly annoying on top of everything else. So there's just a directness to using the CRT that I just love. But as far as like on the desk, I guess I wouldn't really need a CRT for anything modern, but I don't do that much anyway. So it wouldn't really have any influence on how I use modern systems.
I think there's a certain, there's different use case scenarios, right? I mean, if you've got one central display and you want to have all of your systems connected to that one central display, then you probably are going to be looking at a flat panel, and you are going to be wanting to do things like retrofitting 4K to get the best possible picture. Then there's the other approach, which is if I'm still using real hardware to play the games of yesteryear, why wouldn't I want to use real hardware for the display as well?
Right, same.
And I think that's the bottom line there. I think, ultimately it's just part of that overall experience. I think that kind of makes sense to me. Is this something that you think about at all, Oliver?
No, it's not.
So.
I'm fine with laggy panels to probably an embarrassing degree to John. So,
have you used a CRT recently, Oliver?
I've seen. Last time I saw CRT was at CES. They had some CRTs at CES. I do appreciate CRT. Yes,
they had them at CES.
Not new CRTs for sale, but as part of like retro RCA exhibits, and they had one at the AMD booth running one of the FPGA consoles.
There's like a clarity to it in the way it looks and moves. It's so surreal that just flat panels can't match.
Yeah, I'm not as sensitive to that. I am considering the OLEDs at the moment because I have a 55-inch television as like my main television for capture and whatnot, and you can get flagship 55-inch OLEDs. You can't get flagship 55-inch mini LEDs or micro RGBs anymore. So I could be edging towards OLEDs, but in terms of getting better motion clarity than OLED, I don't have a whole lot of interest necessarily in that in particular.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move on. This question from Speed Lima. Dear Frame Time sommeliers, in an ideal future where internal resolution and frame generation are both dynamic, how will the algorithm choose between the two? Do you have higher internal resolutions and less generated frames, or the opposite? Interesting question, right? Because if we are heading to a future where basically you have a display that runs at, say, 300 hertz or 500 hertz, you would kind of like be expecting the PC to be matching the frequency of that display, and it will be doing it via a combination of super resolution and most likely frame generation, next generation versions of them. So, John, what do you think about this? Is it going to be a case of like a user choice as it is now, but maybe a bit more automated, like maybe a super resolution slider and a frame generation slider? Or what do you think the future is there?
That is a tricky UI thing to build, because I guess you could just essentially have more fluidity versus better image quality as like a toggle, right? Like decide what you prefer. But then it also matters based on what kind of display you're using. For instance, if you look at Doom: The Dark Ages, when you use that game on Xbox, I know for Xbox for sure, with VRR and engaged, they actually increase the dynamic resolution scalar target. So like normally they have it a little bit lower to ensure that the frame rate always holds steady, but on here they allow it to go just up a little bit because it knows you're using VRR. So if you, for instance, miss an update and you end up being a little bit lower in terms of frame rate, it's no big deal because VRR can accept the blow, and as a result, you technically get slightly higher resolution, which I think is really interesting, right? But it's only something that's engaged when VRR is turned on. So I think in the same case here, you kind of got to like know what you're doing, right? If you have a VRR display, and even with frame gen, you can be more variable in terms of your target frame rates, right? So and therefore can prefer higher resolutions. But if you're going to a fixed refresh, I think just by default you would want to hit that fixed refresh rate consistently above all else, right?
Right. Or it might be like a window of performance as opposed to like a specific, because I mean, everything's VRR at the moment. You just
Yeah.
want a consistent experience, really, don't you? And there is a bit of wiggle room when you've got like G-Sync.
Well, that's an interesting thing, Rich, though, because not everything's VRR yet. And in fact, like there's so much variability in the TV space. It still kind of amazes me, which gets you thinking about stuff like frame gen. Not everybody's going to be able to take advantage of that. Or if they are, there's other caveats. Like as we saw with Crimson Desert this week, there's this thing where it's patched now, but on PS5, due to the way the VRR works, or sorry, due to the way 120 hertz works, if you have that toggle on, the game would prioritize that over output resolution. And there are a fair number of displays that support 1080p input, but not at full res. I mentioned this during the normal direct, right? So it's like, what do you do there? So there's just there's
right.
not everybody is up to speed with displays that support these features. Modern displays are sold with them over the last like 6-7 years. Like it's just become the norm. But as I'm finding from talking with the audience, it's just the fact that not everybody's using them, and not everybody even wants to upgrade. There's still people on 1080p panels out there that are perfectly happy with it. So it creates a unique environment where you've got to still consider users of older displays. And that's where the whole mode kind of, whether it's automatic or a slider, that stuff's important to get right.
Yeah, you're quite right. I was thinking more in the PC space, but if you're thinking in the console space, then I don't really see there's going to be a huge amount of movement beyond 165 hertz, 144,
Right.
120, moving into the next generation. So that's going to be quite an interesting balancing act, bearing in mind that, you know, when you're using frame generation up to 120, your base frame rate is being sort of lowered depending on the on the frame generation factor. So if you're like using 3x frame gen, you're at base 40 FPS, that sort of thing. You don't really want to go any higher than that. But on the PC side of things, where we're talking about, you know, 500 hertz monitors, yeah, it's a different story. What do you think, Oliver?
Well, for me personally, if we're just like weighing up preferences here, I probably want to get to about 120 FPS or a bit higher, then start to prioritize resolution. So maybe 2x frame gen up to that point, that would be appropriate. Maybe a bit more if I'm going to like 240 or 165 or something like that. But on PC in particular, I generally like to have static scaling just because I don't trust PC to give me consistent DRS behavior that works well. Or even, I mean, I trust the dynamic MFG behavior a little bit more, although I don't think we've seen that. I don't think it's shipped. But certainly when I saw in the demos, it seemed to work fairly well. I kind of trust Nvidia to do a good job there, but maybe not on the DRS side of things. So that's where I would kind of weigh that up. On consoles, you kind of put your faith in the developer and the platform holder. You put your faith in those individuals, and usually it works out. But like you said, I'm not sure how appropriate that tech is because I don't know what HDMI 2.2 support on consoles looks like. I think we will have it, but at what bandwidth? You know, you could have HDMI 2.2 at 64 gigabits per second, something like that. Might not be the full spec, needs DSC. What kind of displays does it support? Like consoles need to have specific enumerated refresh rates that they support, right? Are they going to go all the way to like 4K 240? Is any game going to do that? Like, you know, I mean, there's just so many questions there. I'd be curious to see if there is like some big push for dynamic MFG and all this stuff on consoles, but I'm not currently foreseeing it.
Right. It might be more interesting in the Xbox space if it is more attuned to the PC side of things as well as the living room for the console side. Yeah, I mean, a lot of conjecture there. Curious to see how that all plays out. Let's move on. Final question, Dajarko in brackets Dan asks, any thought on clevery acronyms or more specifically initialisms which Sony could use when naming their upcoming frame generation technology? How about Sony Hyper-Image Temporal Reinsertion, aka Shitter? John?
How about that? Why not? While we're having fun with that, I just noticed earlier that depending on the British accent you're talking with, Sony and Cerny can sound the same.
Right.
As if they are a singular entity.
We did years of straplines punning on that, and eventually it had to stop.
It had to stop.
Yeah. Oliver, thoughts?
Well, I heard from the man himself, from Sony himself, that the branding for Sony's machine learning-based technologies is spectral. PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, for instance, PSSR, right? So I think it'd be something more like PlayStation Spectral Frame Generation, PSFG. It needs to have spectral in the name. So that's my only input into this, or at least that was the thinking 2 years ago when I spoke to him. And that's purely, that has nothing to do with the technology, has nothing to do with what's going on underneath the hood. It's purely a branding exercise, according to Mark Cerny. So I would expect that it would be something like that. I really would not be surprised if it was just PlayStation Spectral Frame Generation, but certainly not this inventive acronym that this person has come up with. I think it would be a little bit simpler, and it would have spectral in the name.
Fair enough. All right. I do like the way you've come up with a perfectly plausible answer to a ridiculous question there, Oliver. So thanks for that.
Only Oliver. I love it.
That's the last question we got for now. So I hope you enjoyed the show. Please do like, subscribe, share. In the off chance that you did, ring bells for notifications for you, and probably entirely imaginary algorithmic boosts for us. Nevertheless, it's there. Patreon.com/Digital Foundry to support the team and everything we do. But that's all from us on this one. We'll be back with another full-blooded direct in a few days, but that's all from us on this one. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.